Welcome to the Berean Remnant. I'm your host, Dr. Bernard Mauser, and today what I want to talk to you about is the issue of tariffs. And if you haven't watched another one of my videos, The Biblical Case Against the Fed, you'll see a common theme here. But what I'm going to try to make is a biblical case against tariffs. Specifically, when I say the biblical case, what I'm really referring to is the moral law. And I think that the tariff is unethical. So currently in the news, tariffs are making a big splash because Trump's tariffs are under review by the Supreme Court as to whether he is violating a law that was instituted in the 1970s about regulations and whether he has the right to institute these tariffs legally. I think we need to make a stronger argument against tariffs. It's the moral argument, because I think tariffs are stealing from us. So if you ask yourself a couple questions about tariffs, what is a tariff? Who benefits? Henry Hazlitt, the great economist and writer, in his Economics in One Lesson, he has a whole chapter about tariffs. And in that, he writes that the tariff has been described as a means of benefiting the producer at the expense of the consumer. So what do we know about tariffs? Tariffs are a barrier to free trade. What is it that free trade does? It actually brings us goods at the lowest possible cost. So tariffs mean higher prices for consumers. Who is it that benefits from this? Well, it tends to be the manufacturers. And of course, there are different arguments offered as to why tariffs should be in place to protect manufacturers of domestic products. So one of the basic ideas of just family economics. This is something that Adam Smith points out in The Wealth of Nations. And let me read to you what he says. It is the maxim of every prudent master of a family never to attempt to make at home what it will cost him more to make than to buy. What is prudence in the conduct of every private family scarce be folly in that of a great kingdom. In other words, if someone else could produce a product extremely cheaply, then it would be folly to have a tariff to protect your domestic industry. He goes on to say, in another spot, by means of glasses, hotbeds, and hot walls, very good grapes can be raised in Scotland, and very good wine too can be made of them at about 30 times the expense, for which at least equally good can be brought from foreign countries. Would it be a reasonable law to prohibit the importation of all foreign wines, merely to encourage the making of claret and burgundy in Scotland? And so this is reinforcing what we see as common sense. Now, the prohibition against stealing is based on the fact that we have private property rights. So God tells you that it is immoral to take from someone else what doesn't belong to you. It doesn't become moral just because you give that to somebody else. There's actually an incentive for domestic manufacturers to appeal to politicians in a process that economists call rent-seeking. If you look at any public choice economics, you could read all about rent-seeking, but basically this is where lobbyists go to politicians. They try to get them to pass regulations, tariffs being one of them, and through their political lobbying and benefits, they get politicians to pass laws like tariffs that protect the domestic manufacturing. Who ends up paying more? All the rest of us. In other words, rather than pushing into the idea that what Trump is doing is illegal, I think what the greater question is it moral? Is it moral to benefit all these very wealthy manufacturers, wealthy businessmen, of which one can accuse both politicians and especially those who are businessmen? You know, Trump has run in those circles his entire life. They're benefiting at the expense of all the rest of America. And so I actually think there's a moral problem here. So it may have been legal that slavery was allowed in the South, but it was immoral. So when the Supreme Court case about Dred Scott came up in 1859, the Supreme Court ruled against Dred Scott because, well, technically it was legal. But regardless of whether it's legal or not, we always have to ask whether a particular law is moral or not. This is actually something that Frederick Bastiat brings up in the law. That of all the countries in the world, the one that most protects the laws in its society is the United States. There's only two areas where the United States does not do this. It's in the realm of slavery and in the realm of tariffs. So the historical precedent for tariffs was the right of the king to tax goods coming into his country, basically to benefit the king. And that was a leftover that was passed on to American government. They saw it as a way of subsidizing the government. But who pays? The rest of us. All the citizens end up paying because we're forced to pay higher prices for things. Now, take a step back and ask yourself the question, if I don't have a right to prohibit the trade between two of my neighbors, so suppose two of my neighbors wanted to exchange something. Maybe one of them wanted to sell pizza to the other one. And I say, okay, listen, you're not allowed to sell pizza to that person because I own the local pizza business in town, and you're taking away from my business. So I'm going to extract a tax from you that forces you to have to pay higher prices. Wouldn't that be immoral if I did it? Of course it is. I don't all of a sudden get the right to enforce this tax just because I'm called the mayor or the city council or the Congress or the parliament or the king or the president. Because I don't have that right as an individual to have this tax upon my neighbor to interfere with his free trade with the other neighbor. How all of a sudden do I acquire this right just because my title's changed? So there's this principle in metaphysics that you can't give what you don't have. As I don't have the right to do that privately, I can't give another person the right that I myself don't possess. So this is tremendously powerful principle. So this tax on all of us, which is the tariff, is stealing. So beyond the question of its legality is its morality. And so even if it was the case that it was legal, then we could still ask the question, is it moral? And I would say it's immoral for these tariffs, as has been pointed out for over 100 years. So if you haven't read Frederick Bastiat's The Law, he unpacks some of this. It's one of the places. So there's been struggles against the tariffs for the last couple hundred years as to the morality of them and whether they should be in place. So I want to bring that to the front of people's minds, especially with this idea of tariffs being in the news today. So I hope there's something here for you to chew on, some good information that you could reflect a little differently on the news of the day. I hope everybody has a great day.